Neera, you have been known as one of the pioneers in women's studies. And some people even refer to you as one of the mothers of women's studies. I don't know how you feel about that. You've written a lot, both in Gujarati and English, about your evolution as a feminist. Could you tell us some of the elements that have gone into this evolution?
Lakshmi, I feel not only excited, but also little nervous and thrilled that over a period of more than 7 decades, I have come to a stage when I can talk something about how I grew up and what has made me feminist. Each one comes, I think, through one's own experiences, through one's own environment, and through one's own predilections. I have also come through my own background, and in which I think one of the initial backgrounds which has affected my mental makeup and my value structure is my family. If you just ask me what was my family background or what was the nature of the family relationship, I think I would say that it was a middle class, educated, upper caste family. We lived in Bombay. In fact, from the first year of my age, my father shifted to Bombay, and that is how though I have been born in Gujarat, my entire upbringing has been in Bombay. My father was a professional, he was a solicitor, and we had, I would say, a very liberal atmosphere in the house. I was the second in our 4 siblings. I had an elder brother. I grew up in an atmosphere where my father had political interests, though not affiliations. But it was a political affiliation to the Indian National Congress. And my mother, who had hardly studied up to 7th standard in those days, I think it was considered to be highly educated stage, she was a very dynamic person and a very progressive woman, a very encouraging mother, with giving freedom to all the children to do whatever they like. I would like to say something about my mother, which is something very special and which has affected me till today, is her liberal attitude, her involvement in all good progressive activities. She took active part in the non-cooperation movement, which was in 1930. She went in the morning to those marches, Prabhat Fairies as they were called. She used to wear khadi for some time, and she used to sell khadi to various people. She took part in all the neighborhood activities. She took part also in educational activities. And this is, I think, the atmosphere which we all children got to associate ourselves with the larger interests than merely confining ourselves to the family life. I was from the beginning interested in a lot of outside activity, and I think somehow or the other the seed of sensitiveness to women's issues were there. I don't know how it came to me, but I think, and here I think I would like to describe one incident of my childhood. You see, I must be about 7 or 8 years old at that time. We were on vacation in Ahmedabad, and there was one house opposite our house where a couple was staying, and they were very loving couple in that sense, and they would naturally like young girls and children coming to them and meeting and playing in their house because they had no child in their house. So they were very hospitable to me. And then one day when I had gone there, the wife was, I think, heating the milk. And there was one friend of her husband had also come. So both the friends were talking with each other very intimately. And then he suddenly saw that the milk was boiling and coming to a boiling point somehow or the other. And so he said, he just addressed his wife and said that just look at it. And she was talking to me very enthusiastically, and at the same time a cat came, and cat overthrew the pot. Now, all these things happened in an instance. But that husband of hers jumped from his seat, gave a big thrashing to his wife. And till today, Lakshmi, let me tell you that the screech of that thrash is pinching me. This has remained in my heart very much, and perhaps it might be the beginning of some sort of sensitiveness to women's problems, women's issues.
Neera, to which school did you go to?
In pre-independence period, and also first 2 decades of the post-independence period, the school has played a tremendous role in building up the consciousness, particularly the consciousness of working for others, nationalist consciousness, which perhaps later on we missed. Of course, right now I would more talk about my school, and it was a nationalist school established by Theosophists under the influence of Anne Besant and others. And as the title suggests, it was called Fellowship School. It was a co-educational school, and today also many people ask me whether it was a vernacular medium or English medium. But in those days, these media problems were never there because we learned through both the languages, and so nobody thought about the medium.
Neera, which college did you go to?
Lakshmi, before I talk to you about my college, let me say something about the location of the house. more particularly because after the 40s, location of the house has tremendous significance in influencing the mind and bringing us to the hard realities of life. On the one hand, to the right-hand side of our building, there is one lane, and then adjacent there are two houses. The first house is okay, but the second building, which is very close, is known as Raj Bhavan. And Raj Bhavan, there are two Raj Bhavans in Bombay. One is the Raj Bhavan where governor resides, and the other Raj Bhavan is where the Communist Party of India was located. And CPI had its location in Raj Bhavan, adjacent to our house. And secondly, at that time it was a commune where many of the leaders were staying there. So initially, because the Communist Party was against the war, there was no problem. But later on, when the Communist Party became the allies, the Soviet Russia became the ally of the British, while the Congress was against the war. And so whenever there would be meetings, particularly on Saturdays and Sundays evening at Chowpatty, the crowd, absolutely armed with stones and other things, would come to that building, throw stones at them and shout anti-war slogans as well as anti-CPI slogans. And that was influencing our mind considerably about the nature of the left party, confrontation of the political groups. Another important item, I would say, or important feature of the location is that our house was in a way a borderline between the Muslim locality and the Hindu locality. Just 2 or 3 buildings on the left. After that, the Muslim locality started. So particularly during the communal riots and when the communal frenzy was there, we had a very, very tense time. And this is why I would say that in this formative period, the currents of, on the one hand, political rivalries and political debates and discourses were also affecting, and on the other hand, the communalism and the rabid communalism, I would say, was also we were exposed to.
When the 40s were very turbulent times, and I remember 1942 you joined college, and those days must have been very interesting, full of different kinds of experiences. Do you think the feminist that you became later, there was some kind of foundation in these years for that person to emerge?
I think 42 was a very important year for me for various reasons. One was that for the first time I joined the college So coming out of the school precincts, it was a new experience, but very exciting. I joined the Elphinstone College, which has been considered a very prestigious and elite college, but also very turbulent college. It was 42, I passed in June. July the college started. In August of the same year, 7th and 8th were the most memorable days when the Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi passed the Quit India resolution. I consider myself very fortunate that I was at that historical meeting. I attended along with my family. That means my parents were also there. And it was a very exciting moment. But when the next day, 9th August, we heard that all the leaders were being arrested and put behind the bars. And since then, the new phase in my life started. I would say my political involvement, though not party affiliation was never there, but political involvement and political awareness and political concerns began from that period. Elphinstone College, as I said, was a very, in a way, though elite, but yet there were very many nationalist currents in the same college. And so we had a lot of students' activism at that time. Actually, the principal, when he called the police, there was a lot of protest that the principal cannot call the police in the precincts of an educational institution. The most important or crucial decision time came for me when in the month of November, second term started, and I had to decide whether I would be joining the college, paying the fees, or not go for the education, further education. And somehow or the other, I opted for the second. I didn't pay the fees, and I said, let the year go waste. And according to me, it was not a waste. But for others, definitely, and for my future career, perhaps it was a little loss. But anyway, I didn't join the college. And that is how a young girl of 17 decided not to continue the college.
And her decision was accepted by her family?
Yes, it was accepted. They said, fine, if you don't want to go join, it's okay, it's your decision. But the crucial moment came when I was attending one meeting at Chowpatty. Because that was the meeting when, because Kasturba Gandhi had expired and Gandhiji had undergone fast. So it was in sympathy with Gandhiji. The meeting was called, and it was a huge meeting. But suddenly the police cordoned everybody. And then we were taken to Gamdevi police chowki. And then, of course, there was no place in the Arthur Road jail for 1,000 women to be accommodated. So they selected, and somehow or the other I also got selected and put under the bars. I with others, we had nearly 25 of us who were put behind the bar. It was a brief period, no doubt, but it was also a very trying period for me and my family. I must give credit to the family also. Because first of all, my father did persuade me that if you want to come out, we can do. There are people who can help us. But I said, no, I don't want to. Let that court decide what is my fate.
Neera, after dropping out for 1 year, you joined Elphinstone College again. So what was the atmosphere like?
There were new friends who had come up, who were all taking part in the political movement, but they were influenced by the left politics and Loya ideology. So I came in contact with the left group very intimately. We spent a lot of time together in reading, attending study circles and all that. And this was also the period when I was considerably influenced by the women leaders during that period, particularly those who were part of the nationalist movement and left movement. So for example, Aruna Asaf Ali, she was underground for a long time, and I would admire her courage. Similarly, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay also was a very, I would say, some sort of heroine for me in terms of the pattern of life she was living and the boldness with which she was staying alone and all that. And on the other hand, I was also admiring the dramatic talents of Harindranath Chattopadhyay, because left influence was very sharp during that period. But one person who has even till today influenced somewhat, I would say, my mental makeup is one lady called Pushpa Mehta. Now she was a very young widow, and she was always wearing black sari, and she had been very much touched by the plight of women. She was also a Congress worker. She later became a minister also. But she was the person who started the first rescue home for women in Ahmedabad. And the way in which she was handling the cases and the way in which she was sympathetically, and she was for the first time talking about not criticizing the women who were coming out of the house, but giving them shelter and protecting them and making them empowered through education, through earning and other things. What we are talking today, she was experimenting on those lines, and I was highly under her influence. The courageous way in which she had been handling the whole problem. But what I would like to tell you about this phase of my life, the adolescent phase of the life, is that somehow or the other, the total atmosphere, that means our macro atmosphere also of the political upheavals, communal and all those things, as well as the family background, they were somehow or the other affecting my psyche, which may not be perceptible at that time, but which has shaped. Because I would like to say at this point of time that this kind of atmosphere was not possible for my other siblings who followed me So perhaps they were nurtured in a different, the family was the same. The schools and colleges which they went were not very different, but the outside atmosphere had completely changed. And so the consciousness which is coming up, not yet of feminism, but of concern for others and concern for women, I think was built up because of this complex intermingling of factors.
Neera, what about the impact of Gandhi himself on you?
Gandhi himself influenced me completely, considerably, I would say. Though I would not call myself a Gandhian, but he influenced me considerably in building up values. Though in my book I have evaluated him, I have said that his rigidity in some matters have really somehow or the other affected the Gandhians as well as the movement itself. But his honesty and his purposiveness of the whole issue and his dedication and his sparkle and candidness, all these things have affected me.
Neera, marriage is one area where a feminist has to take many important decisions. And in India, we also have the system of marriages being arranged by parents. So in your case, how did it happen?
In my case, I had not arranged marriage, but we selected each other. And I think it was, of course, as you might say, that it was a child marriage actually, because I was just 20 years when I got engaged and 21 years when I got married. But I met my husband in political study circles, and over a period of time we had some exchanges, and then we decided to marry. Now, the fortunate, or one could say that the convenient part of the entire relationship was that both of us belonged to the same caste. So the opposition for the intercaste marriage or intercommunal marriage, that experience we had not to undergo. In the case of my husband, he was 10 years older to me. So that was a bit factor for anxiety, particularly on the part of my parents. As far as the match was concerned, as I said, there were fortuitous circumstances that he was coming from a very good, what would one call cultured family. His father was a very well-known literature in Gujarati language. It was also a family which was well known for its cultural activities, for its hospitality, for its gentleness, for its own identity and individuality. And so that way there was nothing to complain, and it, as one says, that there were all factors which could be marked as correct.
Did you have a ritualistic kind of marriage?
No, fortunately not. We had the registration marriage, not at the registrar's office, but we had called the registrar at our house, that is where she was staying. and some friends were witnesses.
Neera, you got married in 1947. And you decided to have a child 10 years later. I think Meher was born in 57.
Yes.
So was this decision yours, or both you and Akshay Bhai decided that you should have a child much later?
No, both of us decided, because both of us were very much concerned with our own career. We were also not economically stable. We wanted to have a sort of a firm companionship, after which we thought we should have a child. And that was a very, very deliberate decision, and we were able to carry out.
Neera, your subject for the MA thesis was the impact of British rule on the position of women in modern India. Now, I don't think that women were the subject for a serious study at this point. So how did you choose this for your
I and my husband discussed what would be really interesting to me and also would somehow contribute to the thinking process. And then we came around this topic of studying, because British rule had just ended. And so I thought that I should examine the status of women. How was it during the pre-independence period, and what were the forces leading to its change or no change, or etc. And that's how I got a good guide, Dr. Kapadia from School of Economics. He was a sociologist, and he readily accepted me as a student. And so that's how I took up the study.
Was it after this that you joined SNDT in 1954? You joined SNDT?
Yes, yes.
What was the atmosphere in SNDT?
I must tell you something about the beginning of SNDT University. SNDT University was started in 1961-6 by one very renowned social reformer, who was himself not merely a reformer by, say, profession or vocation, but he was a practitioner. He dared to marry a widow, and it is courageous of widow to decide to marry. And D.K. Karve or Maharshi Karve is the founder of the university. And there are three features of the university which Karve persistently kept in his mind. One was that he wanted to take higher education to girls, and those girls who were not able to go into a co-educational institution. And that is how he established a women's university. The second feature was that it was the entire teaching had to be in the regional language. And regional languages at that time were Gujarati and Marathi. And later on, Hindi was also added. But Gujarati and Marathi were the two languages in which the entire teaching, even up to post-graduation, was done. And that was a pioneering work. The third feature of the university, which he also kept in mind, was that many girls come from lower class families, lower caste families. They may not get opportunity of coming to the college. So he created a facility of appearing privately.
Neera, 1966 was the golden jubilee year of SNDT. It was a very memorable year for the university. You were in the university from 54 onwards. So how did you participate in this Golden Jubilee celebrations?
We were some 4 or 5 persons in the university who were all working towards women's education. And I wouldn't say that all of them were feminists, but we had the same cause in our mind. And when we were deciding to have a pattern of celebration of the Golden Jubilee, we said that at the launching of the Golden Jubilee, we will have an exhibition. And that exhibition was to be on Indian women's march towards freedom. And the closing function was to be the publication of Golden Jubilee volume. Now in both these events, I took very active part, and I think that I grew during the entire process. My concept about the women's position, various forces determining the woman's status, etc., were being crystallized. Not crystallized completely, but were being crystallized at that time. And when the book was released, Zakir Hussain was the president, and he came, and it was a very, very memorable occasion for the university, because for the first time such a voluminous material over women's education had been brought out by a women's university. And I was part of that experiment. I treasure it like anything.
Neera, when you spoke about your thesis, and you also spoke about the SNDT Women's University, since we are on this issue, I would like to know whether the women's movement in India was a movement that was parallel to the national movement.
I would say yes and no, because the main organization which spearheaded women's issues was All India Women's Conference, which was established in 1927. Now it was very paradoxical that initiated by the colonial administrator, in the sense that he said, why don't you ask for education? Women should ask for more education for women, and that's how the organization started. It was blessed by the Maharanis and upper caste Hindu women at that time. Most of them were Hindu. But slowly it passed into the hands of women who were very actively participating in freedom movement. And so the organization, which was started with saying that we will have nothing to do with politics, slowly got from education to social legislation to political reforms and to Hindu Code Bill, which itself was a political issue and which became till today a political issue. So that way women's movement was a part of nationalist struggle, nationalist, those women who were active in both the organizations, Indian National Congress or even CPI, Communist Party of India, they were there, and in All India Women's Conference, they were more or less the same. And so that kind of interchange and inter-exchange between nationalism and gender issues was going on. And there were occasions, definitely, where the political leaders stalwarts like Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru were saying that right now the gender question is not important, but today more important item on the agenda is freedom for the country. And it was here that some of the women had to, like Amrit Kaur, like Kamala Devi, had to say that no, for us these are the important issues also. So they were somehow or the other trying to build up the bridge and trying to, I think, inadvertently influence the political leaders to willy-nilly take up the gender issue, which was very much highlighted and which had a very, according to me, a very important role when the National Planning Commission was appointed in the 40s. Jawaharlal Nehru was the president and K.T. Shah was one of the important personnel. They had a separate section of National Commission on Women's Role in Planned Economy, which was the first official statement which was being prepared, where women's issues, not merely legal, social, educational, but economic issues and her economic empowerment were also on agenda. And so to that extent, I would say that at times they were running parallelly, at times they were crossing with each other, at times they were supporting each other. So all these cross currents were going on.
What about the term feminism itself? Because I'm asking, because when you published your book, Women in Modern India, you asked one of the women you admired most, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, to write the introduction. And in one part of the introduction, she says that this book is wonderful and she has done very good work. But she says that the stand she is taking is a feminist stand, you know. So I want to know how the term feminist was understood at this time.
Lakshmi, it's good because I was from the beginning expecting that you should ask me this question, since this has been the, I think, bothering many people as to how this term feminism was used and how it came in my book. And if you ask me, I would definitely say that when in 1957 the book was out and Kamala Devi wrote a beautiful introduction, but with this proviso that about feminism, and she labeled me as a feminist, which I think I consider it as a very great tribute rather than a criticism. You see, Kamala Devi was allergic to the term feminism, not after the 50s, but even in the 40s she was allergic to the term. And she has categorically stated elsewhere that we are not like feminists of the West. We are not anti-men. We are struggling for women's rights, but we want men and women to go together. But her other argument, and I think that some of those leftists who were allergic to the word feminism was more because for them economic independence or economic equality was prior to gender equality. And so for Marxism also, the the destruction of capitalism was more important than destruction of gender inequality. And so for them to emphasize these gender questions while this whole struggle for economic independence, national independence is going on, was, I think, diverting the whole stream, and that is how they were very much opposed to feminist movement, because feminist movement was highlighting the gender inequality. And I would say that the gender inequality at that time was not as sharply challenged as it was in the 70s. Actually, it was in the liberal framework which they were challenging, and they just wanted the equal rights with men. They never challenged why this, or they have never asked this question. The movement had never asked this question at that time, that what is the root of inequality. They have been always talking like liberals about, because men and women are equal, because men have more rights, more opportunities to develop, we should have also the same. And this is how the liberal framework and liberal feminism looked at the issue. Along with Kamala Devi, because her one of the first statements came in the book called Our Cause, edited by Shyam Kumari Nehru in the late 40s. And it is there she has written one special article on women's movement in India at that particular. And she has categorically mentioned, Amrit Kaur also categorically mentions, many of them, Sarojini Naidu categorically mentions that we have nothing to do with feminism, in spite of the fact that they were while raising the women's issues, they were being challenged by the men.
Can I kind of end this session, or let us say sum it up by saying that the discussion about patriarchy and other things came later?
Surely.
Because you say that this was within the liberal framework. So the discussion on patriarchy and the entire issue of patriarchy came much after this. Will that be right?
I think so. I think so.
Neera, you said that the SNDT university, since it was a new university, was open to new ideas and experiments. How did they get the idea to start the research unit on women's studies?
One of the important events for the university which happened after the Golden Jubilee was the event when they were celebrating the centenary celebrations of the donor Vithaldas Thakursi. And as a part of the celebration, we had planned actually to have a round table on what should be the future of a women's university. Because in 16 it was okay to have a women's university. To continue for 60 years, it was fine, because still the demand was there for the girls to stay learn in a separate institution. But in the 70s or late 60s, what was the rationale for continuing the women's university only open to women? And there was lot of discussion on that day. Many educationists, many political workers, many academicians had come. And one thing they said, that you cannot close the university. That means you cannot have men enter. It has to retain as a women's university. But the stance has to change. The other thing which happened at that time, which was also a very, one would say, a contributory cause in developing this kind of ideology, was that Professor Nurul Hussain, who was an education minister at that time, came to give convocation address. And in the convocation address he said that SNDT has served its purpose very well, and now SNDT should go in for research and action. That was also the suggestion given by Nurul Hussain. And in all this atmosphere of giving a new direction to the university, accidentally an opportunity came in 1974 March, when a very meager, to this day it is a very meager funding which came, and it was suggested that we should use it for researches on women. And that is how in the 2nd July 1974, Research Center of Women's Studies was started, and I became the first director of that center. The term came much later. We called it research unit because even somebody could ask me, why did you call it women's studies? Because what do you mean by women's studies? Or what was the meaning of women's studies at that time? So I have no answer. I have really no answer how this term we use, but it was a very common terminology in the West. And perhaps those influences which were coming, 1975 also was on the threshold, International Women's Year and all that. But we called it Research Center on Research Unit on Women's Studies. And after the UGC, after nearly more than 10 years, that UGC accepted it or legitimized its existence, we changed the nomenclature into the Research Center on Women's Studies.
Neera, you have been writing a lot and speaking a lot about women's studies being a subject that is not purely theoretical. The understanding of women's studies has to come linked with action. I want to know whether this was a position taken by the Research Center, which was really your position because you started it, or was it the position taken by all women's studies centers?
Lakshmi, the link with the action has been one of the important, I would say, features of Indian women's studies. The Western concept has always been, from the beginning, more theoretical because they started with teaching women's studies. We have come to teaching women's studies at a much later date. So we, even in 1981 conference, first conference on women's studies, which we had in city of Bombay at SNDT University, as far as the aims of women's studies were concerned, we have said that it is research, action and teaching. At least Research Center on Women's Studies and myself and some of others, colleagues of particularly of my generation, we have always been feeling that women's studies has to be linked with action, because without knowing the pulse of the situation, you cannot merely theoretically understand the subject or understand the problem. It is not merely the study. We are not merely interested in theoretical understanding of the position, but we want to change the structure, change the system, change the laws and whatever may be coming in way of women's status, and that is where I think action comes. And it is at this point I would say that it comes in violent conflict with the mainstream subjects. Because they are, as I told you earlier also, that they say that social sciences have to be value-free. Now, value-free means, because when you say that you have to change, then you have to have some values. Change for what? Change of what? Change where? Now, all these things have to come if you accept that there is some concept, there is something in your mind to which you want to go all the action. And it is here I think that the action component is very important for women's studies.
Neera, a linked question that I would like to ask is when you speak very often and when you write, you use women's studies perspective and feminist perspectives alternatively. For you, there is no difference. But I feel that this is not the case with women's studies centers all over India. For you, women's studies has always stood for feminist perspective. This feminist perspective must have evolved over the years with exchanges from various scholars all over the world. Can you tell us about this journey of acquiring perspective?
Surely. Because as you rightly say, I used the term alternatively, depending upon the context. And the perspective, whatever we might call women's studies perspective or feminist perspective, which I have derived, has been over a period of time. And one of the books which had influenced me at that time was by Alva Myrdal and Viola Klein on women's two roles in society. Because for the first time, this question of middle class women coming into the arena of work was coming, and therefore the problem of conflict and adjustment and everything was being highlighted. And from that perspective, slowly, I was developing this whole idea and whole notion that women's status has been affected by the patriarchal societal structure. And how, and to this concept to come, I have traveled a long journey. And not that these terms were unfamiliar to me, because in anthropology we do study patriarchy and patrilineal and matrilineal and all that. But in this adequate perspective, it came to me over a period of time. And in this, many experiences which I had undergone helped. And one of the important exposures which I had was during 3 years, that is 77, 78 and 79 to 80, when I attended various conferences abroad and came in contact with the feminists who were looking at the issue from the whole question of patriarchy and capitalism, both. And that is how I was exposed to liberal feminists, the radical feminists and the socialist feminists. So this was the exposure which I got. And through these exposures, and then before that there was one experience which I had in our country, that in 75, which was in a way the year of emergency, and in that year there was a conference in October at Pune organized by Gail Omlet and others of women of more oppressed category. And of course others had also come, but for the first time to attend such a gathering where prostitutes would be also there, where students will be also there, where teachers would be there, where political party activists would be there, it was also a very great experience for me.
Neera, could you tell us about the action program that the research center itself took up?
Research Center started in 74, and now within 2 years, because we, as I said to you, that we were always thinking of doing action, and the major action program started in 77, 78, and that was in an area south of Bombay, 180 kilometers away, which is called Udwada. And we took first 7 villages in Udwada, and there first we had the survey of that region to find out what are their needs and what are their demands for change. And then it was a beginning of this program. And later on, the entire program was built up on empowering and conscientizing women in particularly the lower caste women to their situation. But the more important question was of making them aware of the situation. And so we had various programs, training programs, seminars and groups discussions and training programs to make women aware. And starting from 7 to 9 villages, today the coverage is to more than 50 villages. And craft center and many things have come up there. But I would also like to emphasize that when we accepted the basic philosophy that action has to be the part of our consciousness raising and our understanding of women's status, action also means supporting others' action and supporting and also participating in those activities which have been undertaken by other women's groups to change society. And this is how I personally and the center came into close contact with the activist groups of those period and might be still continuing. And it is, and as a part of this only, I have been attending most of the activist conferences which have been held in the country and have been benefiting at that doesn't mean that I agree with everything they are saying or agree, I share their way of analysis of everything or share their method of solving the problem, but I do share with them the sensitiveness and the concern they are showing towards the women's issues. We started women's studies by saying that we are going to speak their language, going to speak poor women's language, or the language which they would understand, the idiom which they would understand. But today what we are speaking is something which even we don't understand. So what has happened to the praxis? And this is a very big dilemma which is going on in my mind, but that doesn't mean that I have lost faith in the action part. My firm belief is that you cannot segregate theory from practice. Both of them go together, and somehow or the other, the center or the scholar has to exhibit or manifest that there is concern for both. Because merely talking about action, I don't think has any value.
Even from your experiences of interaction with women of various levels, you must have come across very interesting happenings and experiences. Could you tell us about them?
You see, one of my students became a widow. Now, my student becoming widow means that she was not even 20 years old. So, I went to her house with some of my students. Then when I went there, I had expected that she would be very much, that she might not be seen also in the room, she might be sitting in some corner. Instead, I see her decked in ornaments and beautiful jari sari and all that. And I got shock of my life. Then I asked one of the students that how is it that she is dressed like this? And they said that the custom of the caste is that for 10 days till it is supposed that the body, the soul remains in the area, she will be behaving as if she is the wife of that person. But after that, she will be widow. And so, the tragedy and the contradiction of the entire situation came to my mind, that when a person is in a state of mind when one is not thinking about ornaments or dress or jari or whatever it may be, you make her wear. And then after some time, you completely see that she doesn't touch those things or doesn't think about those things. Now, what kind of social system is it? It is absolutely insensitive to women's feelings and women's mind, what she must be undergoing. You presume that she doesn't have any feeling or she doesn't have any thought. So this was one very shocking experience which I had. Another eye-opener was when I was working in the slum area. And then some women, one of the women was beaten by her husband and who was drunk and all that. Then she was telling me that yesterday he had beaten me and these are the scars and all that. I said, you are living in a community and a neighborhood where you can leave your husband. All these inhibitions and taboos are for our middle class people, where we cannot leave the bettering situation. But you can. Why are you not going out and just throw him away or just leave the situation? And then she told me that no we cannot bear this situation. But, madam, when we stay in the house, we are facing one wolf. But when we will go out, we will have to face 100 wolves. And so they are aware of the reality, that is, there are people who are ready to pounce upon them, and so this is a negotiation. This is a decision which they have consciously made. And the last experience which I have been, so to say, exposed in a very different way, and that has also touched my psyche so much, I must say. This was when I was doing one research field study with one activist, very good activist, very sensitive activist and very live. Perhaps you might be knowing her, Shiraz Balsara.
Yeah, you did the caste study
with her. So Shiraz and I were going in a village where it was the woman was belonging to Naika community, the lower class, lower caste. And her husband was so torturing her, so bettering her, and she was the mainstay of the family. She was earning. And then what happened, that one day that husband also tried to poison her. Meanwhile, she developed a relationship with a pujari, and that pujari was very sympathetic to her, and that must have upset the husband, and husband wanted to marry somebody, so that for him it was okay, but his wife going with pujari was not tolerated. So suddenly she left her home, and the pujari helped her somehow or the other. Then they had the caste council. They had the tribal council where the divorce had to be given, because she asked for the separation. She said, I don't want to stay with this boy, this man who is a danger to my existence itself. So in this situation, which is very, very, very eye-opening, she then Panch, that is the main person, he asked her as to what are you going to do? She said that my husband purchased my body with 500 rupees. I am returning those 500 rupees and I am reclaiming my body.
Neera, whenever we talk of the 80s, we always talk of them as 80s being full of hope. But many young people ask me, so what happened in the 80s that you people are talking about hope? You know, because they are facing the hard realities of today. So what do you think are the events that made us hopeful in the 80s?
You say, I think the mid-70s, the women's movement started. According to some, it was the second phase of the Indian women's movement or the third phase of the Indian women's movement. But after the 70s, the movement became very, very loud, in the sense visible. And there was also a lot of visibility in terms of action, both in the court of law, in the legislature, and on the street. There was Mathura rape case, there were dowry deaths and struggles against dowry. There was the problem of the whole issue of female fetus being killed. There was the issue of media projection and lot of protests against media projection of women. Even in literature and even in the classrooms, many of these questions were being raised. And actually, two events were happening simultaneously also of solidarity. One was the organization of the women's studies, which was started actually in 1981, and every 2 years we had the conference on women's studies. And if we look at the agenda of the conference, if we look at the issues which were taken up by the conference from 81 onwards, we will be feeling that the academia interested in women's studies has been really questioning the subordination or the gender question. And this gender question was asked not merely in terms of family surrounding, but in terms of the wider society, the macro society. Similarly, there were conferences held by the autonomous women's groups also, and they were also raising all these questions of violence, of the way in which the solidarity has to be built up, how do we survive. Then they were also asking the questions like lesbianism, like for single mothers, like problems of survival in patriarchal hegemonic society. So all these questions were being asked, and all these questions were asked at both the levels, and so there was all-round atmosphere of activity, all-round atmosphere of not only discussion but action going on. And today, many times, and I think there is some reason and some justification for feeling that fervor, that kind of enthusiasm, and that kind of spending one's life for a cause is gone or is not visible.
Do you think it's because the 90s have been disturbing in terms of various events that have occurred?
Because what is really happening is that, and actually the 90s were the watershed in a way, various problems came up both at the theoretical level and at the action level. Theoretical level, the issues were like dominance of culture, and in the perception of the women's studies scholars. And so what happened that with the coming of postmodernist thinking also, the whole emphasis was paid or was laid on difference rather than solidarity. It is the whole concept of difference which started in the conference at Calcutta conference, I must say, when for the first time this issue was raised that who speaks for whom, and can we speak for everybody? Can a Hindu woman speak for all the women, or all women have to speak in their own voices? Now, these are the issues which have come up. At times they are real, but at times they are, according to me, exaggerated, because it is not always necessary for an individual to experience exploitation. We can imagine also the suffering of the exploitation. So similarly, one can speak for the other. Now, how much one is speaking, how much one is saying, these are all the problems. So this was one issue which was coming up and which has been dominating the women's studies scholars for a long time, and there is a section who has been influenced. And on the other hand, the divide is of communalism, and which is taking violent form. It requires a great mental courage and mental strength to say that in spite of this, we are one because we are all exploited. We are all suffering, whether we are Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever it may be, or whether we belong to upper caste, lower caste, middle class, intermediary caste, or tribals. Because all these people are today, all these differences are being utilized by the ruling groups, and to some extent we fall prey to all these divisive factors.
Neera, when you have spoken at length about the past and contemporary reality of the existence of women and the kind of stance that feminists have taken over the years. But I know that you have also spoken about an emerging new solidarity. As a feminist, how do you see this new solidarity emerging? From what quarters, from what areas of our experience is this new solidarity going to arise?
I think that the new solidarity, I see glimpses of solidarity coming up, and consciousness being raised, the group actions being taken at various situations. I have seen solidarity being built up in fighting communalism. Particularly, I have some experience and some information on the Gujarat riots, and I know that there are young women and even younger girls who have been taking part in the rescue operations, in relief operations, and they are looking at the problem not from the communal divide but communal harmony. My own feeling is, and my own gut understanding is that because this I also saw during the earthquake, the way in which young groups, I myself had gone there, so I could witness young groups and both boys and girls taking part in the whole entire rehabilitation, rebuilding of the Kutch area. And so I personally think that we cannot afford to lose hope. We have to have hope in the goodness of the human beings, in the need that everybody will have to survive together. However, the problems which are coming up, because human rights has been right now one area where all the groups are combining. My own feminism, I would definitely like to say something and end up the entire discourse, is that I understand feminism in one way as a struggle against exploitation. But this is exploitation of the gender. And it is overthrowing patriarchy and building up a society which will be free of the oppression. But my also feminism tells me somehow or the other, because of my upbringing, because of my middle class background or whatever it may be, that one, and that is my personality also, that one need not be assertive, one need not be very loud in one's behavior, and yet one can be firm in one's viewpoint. And that has made some people doubt whether, because of my exteriority, because I wear a sari which is a very traditional type, I do not cut my hair, I do not have short hair, I do not wear the modern dresses, and I do not perhaps smoke also or drink. I may not be a feminist, but I don't know. For me, these are the exteriors. Some people may have those exteriors with them. I have my own values. I have my own behavior pattern, and I have my own ways of expressing my concern for the solidarity of women, and my belief in solidarity and my belief in the younger generation is very, very firm and very solid.